Brought to you by PrayLatin.com, makers of prayer cards featuring complete English phonetic renderings of Latin pronunciations.
It's 2024. You are no doubt already at least a little tired of politics, especially if you're an American watching this. Don't worry, though. It's going to get worse. It's always going to get worse, especially as we head towards the fall. And I don't usually touch much political stories unless they, of course, touch directly the life of the church. And so we have one such story for you today. In the state of Missouri, the what we have to call around here the Moloch ritual has been about to be put up for vote. By the time this video goes live, we will know if those looking for the signatures needed for their ballot initiative will have gotten what they require. Recording this ahead of time. Signs are that they will. Presently in the state of Missouri, the Moloch ritual is completely prohibited by law, or virtually completely prohibited, in the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision a couple of years ago, the one that upended American politics in a very serious way. In Missouri, of all places, a place that most people tend to think is a very conservative place, if put to a public vote, we're not sure what would happen. It's kind of up in the air. And so the secular media and the powers that be are invoking all sorts of, frankly, diabolical strategies to get that state to embrace the Moloch ritual. That would be quite the victory for them in the cultural battles if they could pull it off there. And signs are they might, as we'll see. And the reason we're talking about this is, since there are so many stories like this in America right now, is not so much because of that battle, but because of what they're doing to try to convince people. And so we have this story from National Public Radio, NPR, the state media of the United States. It's the BBC of the U.S., basically. You get this story here of a nun who is out there campaigning for the Moloch ritual. Yes, you heard that right. A nun is out there campaigning for this. And the story has a lot of subtext to it. There's sort of an implied sort of threat in the story that if the bishops don't stop their resistance, many Catholics will leave the church because they value politics and the temporal over the eternal. That's the implied threat here. So, let's go to the article. Quote, "Nun was pretty low on the list of Sister Barbara's early career options. I certainly did not intend to become a sister," she says recently, standing outside her modest Missouri apartment in jeans and a sweatshirt. She grew up Catholic but didn't think much about it. Then in her early 20s, she fell into a kind of love affair with Catholicism. With its emphasis on serving the poor and the social justice issues of the day, Sister Barbara says, the faith broadened her mind and, quote, was a whole new idea for me about what religious life was really about. But those ideals that drew her in, she says, are no longer in line with the directives she sees from today's Catholic leadership around the Moloch ritual and related issues. She doesn't agree with the Church's position that the Moloch ritual is a sin and should be illegal. I just don't see it in those absolute terms, says Sister Barbara, when asked that her last name not be used because she fears retribution from her local archdiocese for speaking out. I want to put a sticker on the car that says, "Don't like the Moloch ritual? Don't get one," she says. End quote. The nun here is being presented as a sympathetic figure, very obviously. The point of this article by NPR is to sell the greatest evil of our time, one that this country will probably face chastisement for once you start crunching the numbers for what has happened domestically and how we are responsible for this unspeakable evil on the world stage. They're trying to sell that domestically and to sow division between the typical Catholic and the hierarchy. There's, again, an implied threat here. The bishops in that state have come out against the Moloch ritual, as they should. Whatever else they may do as their jobs of bishops, they at least are doing the right thing here on this issue. They're taking a stand against this evil that is considered on the social issues that the church faces one of the non-negotiables. This isn't one of those issues where you can see both sides of an argument, that there might be some wiggle room, this is a non-negotiable. And this nun, we'll use in quotes, has violated and has rejected the Magisterium's authority on such matters. Let's compare the call you heard her say, where she got attracted to the political issues the church gets involved in, to that of St. Teresa of Avila, so I can show you what a real vocation looks like. Because St. Teresa of Avila's calling is actually one example of the typical ways where people are called to religious or ordained life. So this little excerpt comes from a website called anunslife.org to give you an idea of what a more authentic vocation sounds like. Quote, one of Teresa's first mentions of wanting to give her life to God comes in a story from her childhood. Teresa, at the tender age of 7, was inspired to do something big for God. We're not talking here about making crosses out of clothespins. Teresa decided that she and her brother ought to become martyrs because that was the quickest way to heaven. So Teresa and her brother set out in search of unbelievers so they could beg them out of love of God to send them to God. But no sooner had the children started their journey than an uncle caught sight of them and promptly returned them to their mother. Teresa surrendered her dream of martyrdom, concluding that having parents seemed to us to be the greatest obstacle. She resigned herself to an ordinary childhood. Still, she clung to the desire, however innocent and immaturely expressed, to do something big for God. She took consolation in pretending to be a nun. When I played with other girls, I enjoyed it when we pretended we were nuns in a monastery, and it seemed to me that I desired to be one, although not as much as I desired becoming a martyr or a hermit. This episode of Teresa's life reflects the difficulty of feeling called to something, but not knowing exactly what. When I felt called, I thought maybe it meant joining the Jesuit volunteer corps or dedicating myself to marriage and raising a family. Not convinced that religious life was for me, I tested the alternatives, but no matter how good they were or how much I welcomed them, they didn't seem to fit. End quote. That article goes on to describe the point where her vocation was fully awakened, which was when her father, who was at that point a widower, sent young Teresa to a school run by nuns. Being surrounded by nuns woke up her vocation. She became the saint that we know her as today. Now, it might not be fair in the eyes of some to compare this nun who's participating in this great evil deception to her vocation, to that of a saint, but these are the best examples. You find this kind of story repeated by many nuns and religious in their daily life, that they felt calling from early on. They were attracted to holy things. They were attracted to God directly instead of the social issues that the church finds itself wrapped up in. If you are attracted to those issues, there are other options for you in the church that can be rightly ordered, aligning with the magisterium's authority on such matters. A vocation doesn't typically involve rejecting the infallible moral teachings of the church that go back to antiquity. That's just not how it works. This other nun, though, the one used as a tool by the powers of Satan to lure people out of the true faith and into some parody of it that denies the moral teachings of the faith, is helping serve souls up on a platter to Satan. You don't have to believe me. We can go back to the original article here, where we learn just how many souls have been lost because they chose politics over the true faith. Be very careful in your political allegiances that you don't find yourself in conflict with the immemorial teachings of the church. Something we all have to be wary of, especially in years like this. Quote, despite Catholic leadership's firm anti-Moloch position in recent decades, research shows that across the U.S., a majority of Catholics support it. A recent report from the Pew Research Center put the number at 6 in 10. Even in this solidly Republican state of Missouri, many Catholics say they support a ballot measure to enshrine the Moloch ritual and access to it in the state's constitution. An effort to collect enough signatures and put the question to voters is positioning the state as one of the big battlegrounds over the Moloch ritual in November. That's despite an effort from Catholic Church leadership to preserve current laws on such in Missouri, where the procedure is almost entirely illegal. All 4 Missouri Catholic bishops have given monetary donations to prevent the signature campaign from succeeding. Advocates need to get to 172,000 signatures by the 5th of May to put their measure on the ballot. They won't say how close they are, but they're optimistic they'll have enough time and enough names in the coming weeks. There is no doubt in my mind that the Catholic vote is essential to getting the Missouri ballot over the finish line, says Jamie Manson, president of Catholics for the Moloch Ritual. A recent survey found 44% of Missouri voters support the proposed ballot measure, while 37% oppose it and 19% were undecided. Many Catholics interviewed for this story also describe a silent support, as did several other nuns. In fact, one nun said she recently went out to help collect signatures but didn't want to speak about it on the record. Some people who still identify as Catholics, or former Catholics, say they felt a need to make a choice between their faith and their politics. I think the turning point for me was recognizing that the church I belong to doesn't recognize women, says 81-year-old Alice Kitchen, a former nun. End quote. In other words, a fair number of apostates chose politics over their faith. That's a cautionary warning for everybody. Because it's not just this issue. People can choose all sorts of issues that cause them to walk away from their faith, and they go across the political spectrum. Politics, for these people in this story here, was their real religion. That is what they chose. They chose the material over God. And they chose the grossest, most evil material over God that you can imagine. People make similar choices every day, unfortunately. The whole story serves as an implicit threat in the article. If the bishops of Missouri, and presumably in other similarly situated states, Arizona comes to mind right now, don't change their stance on the Moloch ritual, then guess what happens next? Women will leave the faith. That's the threat in the article. The saddest thing for me when I was reading this article before putting this video together for you today was seeing former nuns who left the church over that issue. We talk about a vocations crisis. Anytime you see the nuns on the bus out there, they are like the poster child for the vocations crisis. Because not only are there a lack of vocations to religious life and to the priesthood, but there are many who enter religious life or enter the priesthood and then use their vocation for something else. It's a sign that maybe they didn't actually have a vocation in the first place. I say that as somebody who years ago discerned the priesthood and was told by the bishop, not by the bishop's assistant, in charge of vocations, not so much that I didn't have a vocation, but that I should come back and see them in 5 years, which was their nice way of saying, you probably don't have a vocation. Sometimes, though, people slip through the cracks, and this is what happens. They become allies, the enemy within, who serves the work of Satan in the world. Pray for the nuns that I mentioned in this story. Let me know what you think of this in the comments, please. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't, it does help. So does sharing this on social media, that helps a lot too. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.